Welcome to the Age Groupies Podcast. I'm Mike Ergo, and along with my co-host Lindsay Hiken, we are here to talk about the intersection of endurance sports and mental health. Join us each week as we interview inspiring athletes and coaches, mental health experts, or discuss our own journey with you all. Now, let's get to the show. Hey, Age Groupies, welcome back to another episode with Lindsay and I. And today we have a special guest, Dr. Shauna Springer, and we brought her on. She's been a longtime friend and colleague of me, and has worked in the mental health field for a long time, helped countless amount of vets. And we wanted to bring her on because last week we talked, so we got a little deep, and I brought up the fact that I've been dealing with an eating disorder for a few years now, and I've been very transparent about other topics such as the depression and anxiety, the PTSD I've dealt with, and Lindsay and I have both been pretty open about our struggles with substance use in the past and what it's been like to be on the road to recovery. So that being said, we know there's a lot of people struggling with mental health issues in the endurance sports world. Mm-hmm. And so we wanted to bring on Shauna to talk about what that looks like and how people can use endurance sports in a healthy way, some of the pitfalls of and traps and things we might not know about depression, anxiety, and other common disorders. So Dr. Shauna Springer, aka Doc Springer, aka Shauna, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Mike. Hi, Lindsay. Good to be here.
Hi, I'm excited to meet you and learn a little bit about a little bit more about mental health. I mean, as Mike has shared, he and I have some things in common: sobriety, depression. I don't have the same eating issues as Mike. I just have some of the typical, body image issues and chronic dieting and general dislike of my physical shape that develops from being a female in America and having eyes and seeing media all the time and how you're supposed to look. And, so I'm really excited to hear some of the ways that, you recommend that we kind of address this. So welcome.
Thank you. Yeah. I haven't focused on this for some time, but it was a focus of mine in graduate school, actually. Body image and eating disorders, body dysmorphic disorder was part of my residency when I was doing my psychology training. And so I'm happy to talk about all of it: depression, anxiety, eating and body image issues, all of it. It's just, to me, it's just humanity, just being in the trenches with all of what we all struggle with, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a good point. I was just going to mention too, for our listeners, I know we have listeners that aren't maybe as hardcore as me and Mike in terms of like alcoholism, or, they might think, well, I don't have any mental illness, but I feel like I don't know a person, everyone I've ever gotten close to in my life, as the layers start to peel back and we get comfortable with each other, we hear about dysfunction. It may not be like a full-blown mental illness, but we do hear everyone has some things that they challenges, I feel like.
Yeah. Mike probably has had the same experience that I've had, but it's a real interesting thing being a person who is a psychologist or a mental health social worker, because once people know what you do, they find you in the corner of the party and they tell you things that they don't say in polite conversation, right?
Mm-hmm.
I can't tell you the number of times I've been, with people that look like they have it all together, but nobody does. That's the big secret. Like, nobody does. And so having been, in a private practice for many years with really wealthy, well-educated people before I started working, at the VA and with the warfighter community, it just was so clear to me that nobody is on the inside what they appear to be on the outside. And then you take that and you think about the fact that people who accomplish amazing things in their life tend to have some pretty extreme personality traits. And with that comes the capacity to do amazing things, but also some unique vulnerabilities. And I think that applies to the athletic community very much so, as well as the corporate community.
Yeah. How many times have we heard stories, and we've had a lot of people on this show talk about the addiction or the depression or the whatever challenge they're facing that led them to do extreme things in terms of changing their life and getting involved in endurance sports. We have countless stories of it, and it doesn't stop to be inspiring. But you're right, Shauna. Uh, it doesn't lead to just kind of even keel personalities a lot of times. I mean, we have people with extreme personalities, and like you said, it can go in a productive way, and it can go in an unproductive way. So those of us who have hopefully gotten the unproductive ways out of our system and have found something productive in endurance sports have kind of found our groove. But it's not like it's, I can ever say, oh, I've discovered what's wrong with me, or I've discovered what I'm challenged by, and that knowledge alone solves it. It's an ongoing thing.
Right. You'll always dance with your shadow self, no matter how well you think you're doing.
That is a really good way of putting that. That's a perfect way of putting that. I love that. Because, yeah, I mean, that's definitely my experience, especially with sobriety, is that I mean, I've been sober 17 years in last November. So about 17, I don't know, and some change. And there was a time in my sobriety, probably like around year 10, where I was like, I'm tired of doing all the things that I do, to maintain my sobriety. And I want to just be cured. And why do I still have issues? Like, why are things still coming up? Like, this should be, at this point, I should be, done. And I got over that. I have a, sponsor was like, yeah, this is an ongoing thing. This isn't like, you don't learn it and then you're done. Just like Mike said, it's like that. And every once in a while, that alcoholic Lindsay just pops her head up. And I don't drink, but she makes her thoughts known. And I'm like, oh, hey, there you are.
Yeah.
So now I'm going to be like, oh, we're dancing today. Okay.
We're dancing with a shadow today. Yes. Hello, okay. Red vines. That's the thing with Lindsay and I. We both struggle with a red vine addiction as well. Oh, they're so good.
Yeah.
Better than Twizzlers, right? It's just, yeah.
No, I like a Twizzler. It's like plastic dipped in oil.
Oh, yes. It's so good for the insides of us, I'm sure. But
yeah, exactly.
That color, that sheen, that, health food. They say to eat your colors, right?
Yeah, right. Red is a color. So I have a question, and this is probably pretty deep and broad, and you can answer it however you want, but I'm curious about this connection between mental health and like how that manifests physically. So for me, there's two sides, right? Like when I was really deep in my disease of alcoholism, depression, that manifested physically by me in ingesting a lot of things that were really bad for me. My body's super sensitive. I didn't want that in there. I mean, I was constantly sick and throwing up from it. My body was constantly trying to get rid of the stuff I was ingesting. At the same time, there was a compulsion there. And now it still translates to like seeking that comfort or whatever through maybe red vines or gelato or something that then later makes me feel awful because I'm now pre-diabetic, and it's like I have the knowledge. But on the flip side, in sobriety, and I've been treated for depression. I have meds for that and stuff too. But I've found that endurance sports has been a great way to support and improve my mental health. And I'm just curious about how, I don't really understand how that connection works, like how the a defect or whatever you want to call it in my mental being translates to me wanting to do harmful things to my physical being. It's
yeah. Well, everybody has what you're calling a defect, everybody has their own Achilles heel.
Mm.
First of all, everybody has their own unique place of vulnerability. It shows up in different ways for different people. Whether some people tend to be wired more anxious or prone towards, going into a depressive mode, a vegetative state. I think one of the important things to realize is that it is an altered state of consciousness. So knowledge alone is almost never enough to pull us out of that. We all know the benefits of wellness and healthy living and, all of the things that we're told. We hear it with our ears, but we've all had that experience of lacking the activation energy to actually get something started. So like, if you go down the trail of the depressive tendency, right, we know that if we run or exercise, that we'll feel this burst of energy and this sense of accomplishment and almost a personality shift between the start of the workout and the end of the workout, sometimes really dramatically. And not just the runner's high, not just the natural endorphins we get. It's something deeper. It's a feeling of having really pushed through a barrier and done something that we didn't want to do. But it's so hard to get started when we're in an altered state of consciousness, which is that kind of vegetative mode, that depressed mode. It's just takes such an act of will to get going some days when we're in that kind of mode. So recognizing that it's not our usual self or our optimal self, but it is deeply an altered state of consciousness. Anxiety, very much the same, that our self is split. And we have to figure out, again, to go back to the concept of the shadow self, like how do you integrate that shadow self, recognize it, honor it, and not let it run us. That's the barrier. That's so hard to work through in practice.
Oh my God, it is. I can think of so many times I've gotten up when I've been in a deep depression and went downstairs, looked at my bike trainer and just looked at it. And I'm right there. I'm so close to doing it, but I'm like, I just can't. And this is after, I'd done 3 full Ironmans, so like, I know I physically can do it. I've freaking done it. But in those moments, it just seems like such a monumental task to like whip my leg over the bike and sit down and start to pedal even slowly.
Yeah. The whole Nike campaign, Just Do It, is actually based on sound psychology in a sense, because, and it's kind of the same thing that I think Mel Robbins talks about, the 5-second rule.
Yeah.
It all kind of links up a little bit in the sense that there is such a force holding you down when you're in that depressive mode, that to break through that is really the act of just not staying stuck there, but just doing what you really don't want to do. And then if you get on that bike and you pedal for like even 5 minutes, 10 minutes, usually what kicks in, not always, but usually, is the other self that says, I want to live. I want to be strong. I want to feel good. And I will get this workout in, and I am worthy of, paying this, attention to my body and really taking care of myself and getting strong and fit. And then, like for me, I know when I am in that mode, that depressive mode, and then I start the workout, about 10 minutes in, there's like this flood of like inspiration and like articles I should write and things I should do. And like all of this stuff comes like pouring out of me that was blocked because I was in a different mental mode entirely.
Mike here. I want to talk to you about UCAN Superstarch. UCAN is what I consume on the race course and for long or intense training sessions. Now, it's different than any sports nutrition out there because they use superstarch. Superstarch is a complex carbohydrate that doesn't spike blood sugar, delivering a slow and steady release of glucose into the bloodstream. Stable blood sugar provides steady energy to both the muscles and the brain and controls cravings caused by blood sugar lows. I recently used this to complete the Pandemic Man 70.3 using only UCAN, and let me tell you guys, I was surprised by how well it worked, pleasantly surprised. I didn't need to use any gels, anything, just UCAN. And I felt great. I didn't feel bloated, didn't feel hungry, didn't have any of those intense cravings I get on the race course a lot. So I want you to try it out too. Learn about why you should feel the pursuit with UCAN and save 10% on all your orders by using the link in the show notes. Thanks.
I love that you brought up Mel Robbins' 5-second rule. If you've been listening to the podcast pretty much the whole time, when I did my Santa Rosa Ironman race report recap, I mentioned the Mel Robbins 5-second rule because I used it during that race. I was slightly injured with my knees and still wanted to do it. And I started on the swim when the elite guys made their second lap and they just swam over top of us. I'm used to that and I'm okay with it. I'm actually like, it's no big deal. But what happened was I got a little like discombobulated, and then there was a guy who was not one of the elite ones who was having a freaking meltdown, and he was doing that breathing of like right next to me, and so the whole thing just was like kind of
Which is
nightmarish.
contagious.
Yeah, it
It's
just kind of,
contagious.
and I was
Yeah.
like, I'm not going to take on all this crap. And I had remembered, I had just heard her speak live and had, it was like, I'm using the 5, and I just started counting down. I was like 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. And I just started swimming, got back on track. And then on the bike, when I was like, everyone's blown past me and I have to kind of soft pedal if I have any shot of running, I was just like, don't get sucked at, I was using that the whole time I used it to get through. And now sometimes I use it to get out of bed when in the morning at 5:30, I'm like, ugh. Yeah, so check that out. If you're a listener, you're not really sure what it is, you can just Google it. She's all over the place and she's amazing.
I'll put it in the show notes too.
Yeah, but back to Shauna's point, it just doing something like that breaks that. It just sort of, for me anyway, breaks that that sort of that shadow self that wants to keep me inactive and sitting in my own stuff.
Doing it, like thinking about it, we can come up in those altered states. I believe, and I'd like to hear Shauna's idea on this, is that my mind is telling me all the reasons I can't do something or I shouldn't. And so it's a fruitless exercise to try to think myself through it. So I just have to freaking do it.
Yeah.
Just have to do it.
That's right. This is where cognitive therapy techniques won't have the muscle to get you there a lot of the time, because people don't realize that when you are in that altered state, it's a formidable psychological enemy. And at a certain point, you just have to leverage something stronger, something deeper. One of the times that, I've told you about this, Mike, that I've really been able to sustain an exercise habit was when I was getting up at, 4:45 to meet my friend Chrissy. And she would run me all over town in the dark. It was really hard for me because she was in much better shape than I was. But I did it because I would never leave a friend alone in the dark. There's a deeper value there. So it was really for me about stacking my sacred values against what I didn't want to do, which is get out of bed at 4 a.m. and, get myself down to where we would meet up and do this thing that was physically really difficult. And she's lovely. And we, she talked the whole time and I gasped for air.
Yeah.
But I was able to maintain that because in that case, I had an external system in place that did not allow me to dance with the shadow self too much. It just wasn't as strong as the deeper values. And so sometimes it even takes more than kind of a 5-second rule or just do it. Sometimes you have to really pull your tribe in and leverage other values that are deeper to get yourself going.
I like that. Yeah. That's the advantage of having like an accountability buddy or someone who will say, hey, I need you to call me and say, hey, are you working out? Are you taking care of yourself today? And so you have that commitment to the other person, at least, and you have that other person reaching out to you.
Well, you've been that person for me, Mike. You know you have, and you've sent me like little motivational, texts and stuff to get me going, and that makes the difference on those days. Some days when I'm just like in work mode, that's comfortable for me to just work and work and work without taking a break or focusing on myself.
Mm-hmm.
So you've been part of that kind of core unit of support for me around balance this out a little bit. Like, you have a body too, you have a physical presence too, not just a mental presence. The other thing, to go back to what you were saying, Lindsay, about anxiety, is that it's an interesting thing because it really does jump the gap between people. It's one of those emotions where if you're around someone who's highly anxious, it can actually be sort of contagious in the sense of you can absorb that emotion, and it can get you ramped up as well in a way that's not helpful.
Yep. And I grew up in a very anxious household. So I've had to work through a lot of that as an adult. Like, love my mom, but it's and it's not her fault. My grandmother was fear-based. I mean, that's just kind of like my family. But as I've grown older and gotten a little healthier on my own, mentally and emotionally, I can now think back to some of just the things that were said around my, home when I was growing up, and recognize that those were just sort of like fear-based, anxious statements, and they had that effect. I was a child, like I wasn't responsible for any of the stuff that was happening, and I wasn't being held responsible. I just would hear the conversations, and I would take on that anxiety, and that bled over into adulthood. And at some point in my sobriety, I had a conversation with my mother who, this is just an example of the kind of thinking. My stepfather bought something my mom didn't think that he should have bought, even though he's a grown-up and it's his money. And she was really upset, and she's like, if he keeps doing this, we're going to be homeless. And I was like, you have a home and a second home in a summer place, neither of which have a mortgage on it. Like, how the F are you going to get from there to homeless? It's going to take a monumental effort on your part to get, but that's the kind of thinking. And letting go that loop of sort of like that ingrained fear-based thinking is, I think, some of the deeper work I'm still doing in sobriety. It's like letting go of the drinking is definitely a hard thing, but in some ways it was less insidious than the anxiety and just that sort of like that lens of the world of coming at everything like it's going to be bad. That's very hard too.
Because sometimes you don't know you're thinking that way, so it's hard because you can't physically see it. You can physically see yourself taking shots or drinking.
Exactly. Exactly.
We talk about the epigenetics of trauma, right? How trauma can be passed down generationally to the younger generation from the parents, and it works the same for an anxiety mindset, or in a sense, like the two are thematically linked because one views the world through a sense of threat. Everything gets filtered, right, through a sense of threat. That's the commonality between the two. And there's also a linkage with anxiety and depression that I'm just so surprised that nobody really talks about or recognizes, because I'm sure, Mike, you've probably seen this too in your practice. If somebody is anxious for long enough, they're gonna go into a depressive state many times. It's the same principle in a macro sense of, if you stay up 2 nights, you're gonna crash. If you stay anxious for long enough about things you can't control, to me, there's a natural positive correlation between then crashing and going into a depressive vegetative state. And I think that's the body kind of cycling to protect itself and to rest from the continual floods of corticosteroids and other anxiety related chemicals.
Yeah. That makes so much sense. If the pendulum swings too far one way, it's going to swing just as hard the other.
Mhm.
Yeah. Yep. So health is in kind of the middle, is in dancing with your shadow self, but not getting pulled back and forth across the pendulum.
Mhm.
And actually, related to anxiety, I'm doing a lot of work with a really innovative approach for treating trauma called stellate ganglion block. Lindsay, have you ever heard of this?
Mm-mm.
Mike knows about it, but I'll fill you in.
Yeah.
It's really interesting because the elite athletic community has known about this for years and used it for years to regulate their performance. And nobody knows about it generally. And it's an injection in a cluster of nerves in the neck, a few inches above the collarbone, that seems to calm an overactive fight or flight system.
Ah.
So I first learned about it when I was at the VA, back in the times when Mike and I were first, collaborating around some things. Mike was at the vet center. I was at the VA at the time. And we were, working together across, clinics to take care of some people and do some other cool things. And toward the end of my time at the VA, I had a special forces medic who came to me and said, I heard about this. I'm always jacked up, even after treatment. I get flooded with adrenaline. I get panic attacks. I can't sleep. I jump out of my skin when someone walks up behind me. Can you get this for me? And so there was a pain provider. It's administered by pain providers. I don't do anything with the injection myself, but I was in the operating room with him when he got that injection, and it changed everything for him. It was just the whole equation changed.
Wow.
And then the work we were able to do in therapy when he was calm again in his own body was very different. And I was able to teach him thinking and behavior that he was really able to implement in a way that changed the whole trajectory of his life. For many years, he never needed another injection, another shot. He did great. And so I ended up teaming up with Dr. Eugene Lipov out of Chicago, who was the guy who wrote the first case report on this. He really made the connection that this pain procedure that's been around for about 100 years might address the hyperarousal cluster of symptoms of post-traumatic stress. And so he had written some articles, and it had really been also developed in the special forces community by some docs there, Dr. Mulvaney, Dr. Lynch, and at Army hospitals by Dr. Brian McLean and others. So almost nobody has heard of this, except that in the elite athletic community, they've been using this for a long time to reach optimal performance, because there is an understanding that too much anxiety puts you out of the range of optimal performance in terms of the Yerkes-Dodson law of arousal.
That's really interesting. I had no idea about this, and I love the idea of something that will serve as a stopgap so that someone can then get the help and therapy that they need.
Yeah. I mean, when you're speaking to someone who's panicked or overly anxious, let's say, there's nothing you can really tell them except helping them to slow down and breathe, because they're unable to hear it. And my understanding of that is, if someone's panicked and they're in the fight or flight mode, a lot of the blood in their thinking brain is not there. It's recruited to the arms and legs to take flight or fight. And so once we can slow things down and get them to think again, then the conditions are right and we can actually make some kind of changes.
That's it. Exactly. That was the huge epiphany for me last holiday season. I said, I have been trying to do therapy for people who are in the wrong mind state to receive it. Right. And this is also the reason why we talked about that altered mode with exercise. It's the same thing based on this physiology. It's so hard to shift off it because it's very hard to access you're sort of, oh, he's got a dog there. Is that Valor?
This is
Who's
Bruno
that?
right here.
Oh, I
Valer's in the
thought I
back.
saw. Oh, it's a really cute dachshund, right?
It's adorable.
Yep.
He's a regular guest on the show.
Oh, good.
Yeah, he usually
Okay.
shows up halfway through and barks and lets us know he wants to be let in the podcast studio.
You know, I always like think about like people's like service animals. Like,
Mhm.
what if they pick up on my anxiety and come and like lick me, and then everybody will know
Yeah.
that I'm anxious right now.
So
yeah.
you were saying about, so I can hear how and I can understand how if someone's in a very heightened state of like fight or flight, you know, they would need this kind of stopgap. But what about someone who maybe isn't that extreme? But I'll just use myself as an example. I just described how I grew up. And so for me, I mean, I meditate, I work out, I do yoga. I've done a lot of work on trying to let go of some of this anxiety. But I will say my partner often calls me, he's got a lot of nicknames for me, but one of them is just symptoms, because I'm often have these, I have all these autoimmune things like hair loss, like I'll get bald patches, alopecia. I have like canker sores. I get all these hives. I get itchy all over. And the doctors just keep telling me that they don't know what it is. They think it's probably stress related. And I think what's happened is I've become really, really good at living in sort of a state of like generalized anxiety. It's to the point where I can't even really feel it, but it manifests physically regularly, like weekly.
Yes, that's it. So the thing here that's really important is that when you are a fish swimming in the stream of that kind of experience, it's very hard to get a perspective on it or to even know how bad it is.
Mhm.
So, you know, I don't know that you would qualify as having a diagnosis of PTSD perhaps or not, but certainly, you know, the concept that I talk about of chronic threat response
Mhm.
would probably apply to a lot of people in this country, especially after this year, where people have been, you know, really steeped in anxiety. All of us for a year. There's this invisible threat. You know, you have to be vigilant. You could get this, you know, virus that nobody can see. People you love could suddenly die. You know, you could be cut off in your grief. Like, there's a lot for us to consider being anxious about, right? And to be otherwise would be sort of abnormal in the context of this past year. But when you've always felt that way, it's very, very hard to get a perspective on it. And so taking it off of PTSD and putting it onto, you know, chronic threat response and looking at those hyperarousal cluster of symptoms, the sleep disturbance, the difficulties concentrating, the floods of anxiety, the startle response, the sense of hypervigilance. Those are some of the hyperarousal symptoms that this injection treats, based on the understanding that a lot of the anxiety response comes down to a biological injury. And it's not invisible if you have the right brain scan. So the doctors that I work with can see the effects of this kind of symptom pattern, this anxiety or PTSD as the case may be, on the brain. And a healed brain looks different than an injured brain. So what will happen in the next 5 to 10 years is that, you know, and my organization will be a large part of driving this, I think, since we're now, you know, in about 15 states and opening in Australia and just kind of like opening all across the country to make this and other treatments available as well, is that we will be able to take a look at someone's brain and say, yeah, there's something to be addressed here, and we can address it directly without any stigma. It's just something that's an injury that we can treat. But then you have to also do the work, like you were saying, Lindsay. It's not enough just to get an injection. You have to work with people like Mike or myself, who can really help with the thinking and behavior that maintains that long-term response.
Awesome. I like the idea. I have to tell you, just not to make light of this, but I really like the idea of getting an injection that is going to A, lower my anxiety level, and B, improve my triathlon performance. Like, that's a freaking,
Yeah.
that is a miracle cure right there. And yeah, I think that I am happy that societally, I think we are becoming more open to the idea of people having various mental illnesses and not stigmatizing them as much. But to say, that you are just an anxious person based on a variety of things that happened is still there. I feel like there's a lot of like, just suck it up type of
Mhm.
approach from a lot of people, or in their mind, like it's not that big of a deal, or and in my own mind, like it's hard for me to it's one thing to deal with alcoholism, because that was very, like Mike was saying, it's very clear, like you're a drunk and you're ruining your life. I mean, it's very straightforward. With something that can in some ways be more subtle or whatever, or is not as clearly defined as alcoholism or specific type of depression that's treatable with meds. I've even had a hard time allowing myself the space to admit it and try to get help around it, if that makes sense. I've had an attitude of, I think a lot of a lot of people and endurance athletes are sort of like, I'm just going to muscle through this.
Right. Yeah.
But it's exhausting, and I'm 50 now, and I'm like kind of tired of regularly having a mouthful of sores, and it's not like a herpes thing, it's a autoimmune thing. And to have my doctor just be like, well, try to relax. I'm like, okay.
Yeah. I think it's the difference between, let's say you're at a swim workout and you have some stiffness and you're like, okay, I'm just going to work through this a little bit, versus having like a sprained or strained muscle that you were just going to further injure if you continue to work out like that. So it's like, what if we treated that?
Yes.
And then you can
Yeah.
do the hard work and you can suck it up when it's just the struggle of growth and not the struggle of injury.
Yeah, it's exactly right. It's exactly right to both of you. So the analogy that we've been using is, the injection, in this case, the stellate ganglion block, is like getting your knee replaced. And then you have to do the physical therapy afterwards, which is the talk therapy and mind body work to kind of get to a new normal. But the athletic community, to your point, Lindsay, is it's very hardy and strong-minded, and that can be a vulnerability, actually, because they can have a hard time recognizing when something is an injury that needs to be addressed as an injury, versus just, the body needing to be, stretched out or accommodated in some way to get to goal. And then there's the mental game of it too. So like my friend Sydney comes to mind. He is somebody that we both grew up in LA, but very different parts of LA. He grew up in the inner city, was often homeless, went into the Marine Corps, and he played in the Marine Corps football team. I didn't even know they had one until, he told me. And then, and he still plays, and he's around 50, and he's really, he can take a 20-year-old. I mean, he is like an amazing athlete and just an incredibly strong-willed person in all the ways that I love and admire about him. But he had a stellate ganglion block, and he was part of a documentary series I can send you guys that Penn Fed did. It was fascinating. So they came to the clinic and they videotaped him, and then they went back to LA, to the inner city, where he was traumatized so many times, and walked the inner city with him, and you can sort of see the shift. But what's not captured is the conversations that we've had, that he would be fine with me sharing, about how, as a semi-pro football player still, and a really good one, he said that this procedure has really changed his improvement of the game, in the sense of, he used to sort of like have this mental chatter every day. He'd play, he'd beat himself up, and he'd say, why didn't I do that? And he'd get really stuck about the things in his performance as an athlete that were not what he considered to be okay. And now he said the shift has been, he's able to really step back from that and say, it's all right, I'm not going to get stuck there, I did well. And like, it's changed his whole enjoyment of the sport that he loves, and also improved his performance accordingly, because he's not getting stuck in that loop of like always thrashing himself for what he didn't do right. And so I think the mind state factor for athletes is such a key, and being able to determine that there is something that needs to be addressed is also a challenge for many of them.
Yeah, that that mind state. When I'm doing a long workout, or especially like a long race, and I think that we've heard a million times people say that for endurance sports, the mind gives out well before the body actually needs to quit.
Mm-hmm.
And I saw that, racing, because my Ironman Santa Rosa was long. It was a long race. My knees were a mess, and it was not very fast, but I was happy to be out there. But when it got dark and you couldn't see, you just had a headlamp on, so all you could see, and there was no street lights, so you could just only see this one little light. So it was just you and your brain, and a little point of light. There was nothing else to really look at anymore. You just started seeing people falling left and right, just sitting down. And what occurred to me was that, I would kind of come up on them and I could see them running and then just sitting down. And it was like, they weren't injured, but their brain was giving out. And it's all about the thoughts, right? Of what their brain is telling them. And then similarly, with, I'm probably with PTSD, and definitely with and anxiety, the self-talk is, it just, for me anyway, it's very wearing, right? I just, this constant like running dialogue, and it's never a voice of like, you know what, you are doing really well. That's not the voice.
Yeah. No, it's not Oprah.
No, it's definitely not. It's not Oprah.
Yeah.
And
it's a tough thing with anxiety. It's like, it ramps you up too. So at a certain point, if you ramp yourself up that much, then you're in the like gasping breath, like you saw that guy in the swim. And then it's like, you're counting on that voice or another voice to show up and calm you down. It's like, you're in a tough spot there.
Yeah. Yeah. The self-talk is definitely something that, where if this injection gave you the space a little bit to be like, I'm actually gonna not take that on and take all the feelings and emotions that go with it. Very helpful.
So in the Marines, Mike knows this, but it'd be like the OODA loop, the ability to step back and evaluate before jumping into whatever it is, or sort of falling into a mindset. And that's where the therapy comes in, because you have to also have the skills and the insight to shift off of that. But to your point, they actually, when I was doing my residency in a fear and anxiety disorders clinic many years ago, they actually would have us talk to patients about a study where the two conditions were, in one condition, people had to do like physically exhausting exercises until their muscles totally fatigued. And in the other condition, to do mentally challenging exercises that were sort of unsolvable and like grind away at that mentally, right? But not physically. And what the research showed was that the people in a mental condition required a lot more rest to get back to baseline. So in other words, like the mental exhaustion was a more formidable enemy to the person than the physical exhaustion, and required a longer recovery time. And that is relevant because the mental battle, as you said, is probably the bigger challenge than just the physical battle. And there's research to show that.
As my my partner is also sober, and we joke about how like before we even our feet get out of the bed, in the morning, we have to overcome our shadow self that's already talking shit. You know what I mean? I heard a guy in a meeting once who I can't do it, but he did it so well. He, the like the announcer that's calling like racehorses,
Yeah.
and he did this whole thing of like he his eyes open and it's like, and they're off, fear, loathing, self, and he's like, there's, and self-hatred's taking the lead as they go around the corner. And that is that's kind of the deal. And we have to remind ourselves sometimes, like if we're comparing ourselves to a quote unquote normie, who, I mean, no one's what's normal, but some people don't have to battle quite as big of a voice or loud of a voice right off the bat. And we have to remind ourselves like we're doing okay considering what we deal with before we even get a cup of coffee in the morning.
Yeah.
So
yeah, that's been the difference of and we talked about that a little last week, of being able to notice that you're in a battle like that, and to take the approach of recognizing that battle and saying, okay, given the fact that I am in this battle, I'm doing all right. And which is a much more preferable statement to make than, oh, shit's fucked up, you're really messed up, better, like this is not going to work out.
Right.
Yeah, right. I think so much of it is discerning the shadow self and knowing its plays, right?
Yeah.
Knowing how it will come at you, right? This is a type of mental warfare, and a helpful exercise for some of the people I've worked with and supported has been to really take some time to get to know their shadow self, and really say, okay, if this shadow self had a personality, and I don't mean like multiple personalities in the kind of classic sense, but we all have several identities in us, right? What are the identities of that shadow self, and how does it come at me? What lessons does it try to teach me? Like really making that explicit and putting it into words so that we are not ambushed or overrun by it, so that we recognize it when it comes. And the thing about it is that there is also power and wisdom in the shadow self to be gained from that. And I think back to a conversation that you and I had, Mike, about, my comfort with aggression, and having done martial arts for a number of years, and also, just having had other sort of odd experiences like, alligator hunting and the Amazon River.
Holy crap.
In college. And so I'm talking to Mike, and I'm talking about how, once you cut off the head of an alligator, what they would call lagartos, it still can bite you. And so it still has reflexes for many, many hours. And so to make sure that it's not a danger, the way is to dig your finger into the eye socket. And if the mouth opens, it's still dangerous. And Mike goes, oh yeah, dead checks. In terms of like the enemy combatants, right?
Yeah.
To make sure they're no longer a threat. They've been neutralized. And my world made sense a little bit more after we had that conversation, because that aggressive side, that potential for aggression is part of my shadow self that I'm aware of. And I can, I think, understand warfighters and link up with them mentally, because I'm comfortable now with my aggressive self or my potential to be aggressive, right? So there are things in that shadow self that are absolutely assets if you can recognize them and befriend them, if that makes sense.
Yes, and that's actually a really helpful idea, and I like that. I like that you use the aggressive self as an example, because my default would be to try to deny or stifle the existence of any part of myself I don't feel is useful or quote unquote right, as opposed to not embrace it in a way that I act out, but embrace it in that, like, it's okay. It doesn't make me a bad person. I mean, the stifling and would be as a result of me feeling like that's me being a bad, quote unquote, bad person. All the judgments of, I'm constantly in the state of like judging, and to say, well, that's a part of me, and there's something for me to acknowledge here. It doesn't make it, it doesn't inform who I am as a good or bad. I'm just a human being, and this is a part of me. That's very useful.
The protective part of the shadow self is strong, right? So even that voice of anxiety that we all hear, it is probably adaptive because we've had it forever in humankind. And so I would theorize that it's there to protect us. It's there to defend and protect us against a perceived threat. And we don't want to just like slam it down and override it aggressively, but to kind of come alongside it if we can and say, what have you got for me? Okay, I hear you. Okay, thank you for that. It's safe, and I'm going to move ahead and take this risk. Right. That's the difference between befriending it and rejecting it.
Right. Because then it just feels like it needs to scream louder, because it's like, you're not hearing me and there's a threat, kind of deal.
Like humans do, right? They'll escalate.
I always refer to it as like trying to hold a basketball underwater. You can do that for a little while at an exorbitant amount of energy that you have to expend, and then it's just gonna boop, blow out of the water, hit you right in the face. What I don't know what you think about this, Shauna, but what I've done when I notice that aggressive self or that anxious self coming up, I say, okay, depending on the situation, I'm like, I hear you, and I'll give you the space at a later time. Or if I really need to listen to it right then, maybe I'll do a set of push-ups or something, or, let myself know that, okay, I got a sprint session later this week and I can really use that aggressive self right there.
Yeah. I think that's exactly it, is that you, instead of rejecting it, accept it and channel it, or honor it in the sense of giving it time to be heard. Whether it's, what have you got for me? What is the lesson in this? Or can I channel it? And I'm about to deploy an experiment on myself. I got one of those fight camp gyms, where you punch, and I'm thinking maybe that'll be a good outlet for my aggressive self. Because, having been basically trapped at home for a year, there's like, it's hard to find an outlet for the things that don't go well, or the things that are frustrating. And so we'll see how that goes. But I definitely think these things can be channeled and understood and used in a positive way.
This is just, we could do a whole podcast on this, but when you guys are talking about the aggressive self particularly, it does make me feel, and I'm thinking about that for myself, like, what is my aggressive self? Do I have one? I'm sure everyone does, but the what popped into my mind is this sort of knot in my stomach or it didn't pop into my mind. I got a knot in my stomach when I was thinking about that, and it's related to external pressures, to, as a African American female, to not be like perceived as the angry Black woman. And when I'm listening to you guys, what I'm thinking about is how I am unable to currently, sitting here, tap into, do I even have an aggressive side? Because the only thing I can think of is how much I need to be calm and inviting in an effort to counteract the outward perception, or the external perception of who I am as a Black person. I'm not violent, even though you might think I'm violent just because if you are afraid of Black people, which unfortunately a lot of people are,
Right.
So great. Looks like I got more to work on. Thanks.
Well, no. Hopefully this should be like a good release for you, though.
Yeah.
Because when I hear you say that, what I hear you say is that you have been suppressing your aggressive self, because we all have an aggressive self. We do. There's stuff that goes wrong, and the the decision to protect ourselves, or the instinct to protect ourselves, is part of who we all are. I think you are not, you're not unusual at all in suppressing that. Our society tends to suppress that. It's part of why combat veterans don't feel very understood by society, is because they suppress it. And then you've got another level that's a real thing, where you've got this whole societal level of shame put on you about whether you get to express your aggressive self, because, you know, as a Black woman, you don't want people to make assumptions about your character based on your, you know, ability to carry out that feeling. And so I would say, rather than thinking about it as work, maybe play around with that a little bit, and let's see what happens to some of the symptoms, some of the anxiety, right?
Yeah.
Because I think if you can link that up with the insight that those two are related, that when you don't have an outlet for befriending your shadow side and being aggressive in a way that feels good and healthy, that you will get symptoms. Your body will start to eat itself alive. And so I'm not saying that's the solution, but I think it will be a helpful thing for you to think about, hey, what about boxing or some other kind of thing that is appropriately, you know, an aggressive outlet for the things that you do want to feel aggressive about, and then form that target in your mind and do some work with that, in the sense of playing with that shadow side, right? Dance with that and see what changes.
Yeah, I mean, this is essentially a big breakthrough for me, because one of the things I've worked on really hard in my sobriety with my sponsor, who happens to be a retired therapist, for fortunately for me, but is this just generalized internal feeling that I'm not okay. Not in the sense of like I'm not safe, but in the sense of like I'm innately flawed, you know. And when you're talking, when we're just talking about this, and I had to sort of come up, and you're saying to try to integrate this and you know, maybe acknowledge this, it's sort of like, oh, of course, I've been like suppressing who maybe I am all my life, right? To be to meet what I think I need to be who I think I need to be, to appease an external view of myself.
Yes.
How am I going to simultaneously suppress who I am and also feel okay about who I am? Like that those two things are
Exactly.
right. And
Yeah. You have a right to have that aggressive instinct and to express it in a way that's healthy for you. It doesn't make you an angry person.
right.
It doesn't make you an aggressive person. It gives you a sense of self-command and self-respect to be able to feel everything you feel and express it in the way you choose, knowing that you hold your center no matter what you feel.
Okay. I'm going to start crying, so I'm going to stop talking.
It's Lindsay, this is in one way I can relate to you in terms of how, like Shauna was talking about, coming back from combat and not seeing a place in society for the aggression or my feelings, and trying so hard to really like cow myself to be ultra peaceful or ultra, you know, nice. And it was suppressing a part of me. And I didn't feel good about it.
Yeah.
I mean, it wasn't, I didn't experience, I can't say I experienced that my whole life like you, but I definitely have experienced it the last 16 years for sure.
That's a good long time.
Yeah, about a little less than your sobriety. So it's a good amount of time. Yeah. So it's suppression never seems to be good unless it's suppressing fire, giving cover to your buddies.
Yeah. Wow.
It's one of the things I love about hanging out with combat vets like Mike is there's an acceptance and an understanding of the aggressive side of us. And so when I go into those circles, it makes me feel normal to have those instincts. I don't act on them. You know, having the instinct is not the same as aggressing against other humans for no reason. You know, in war, there's a reason why we aggress, but just to have that instinct and be okay with it is something our society is not comfortable with.
Yeah.
But it becomes very clear when you step into those circles that, like I can teach them about how to have a good fight in their marriage for 2 hours, and then they'll take out like an arsenal of firearms and we'll go shoot. And it's just linked up because there's a comfort with how do we appropriately have conflict? And then we have an aggressive side. How do we have self-command of that, but also honor it?
But see this, and this idea that I would embrace the aggressive side of me would actually, I'm a pretty, like I'm a huge animal lover, and I generally don't want to harm people. So I'm not particularly worried that I would aggress, but listening to you say that, I think being able to integrate it would be helpful with the anxiety, in the sense that I came from this fear-based background. Like that's my base of, when I was a child, like that's the fear that you're going to be victimized. There's like that sort of just generalized feeling with all the people in my family, right? They're going to be victims. Essentially, something bad's going to happen. And to feel like I could embrace the aggressive side of me would make me feel more capable of taking care of myself.
Yes.
And that would provide a sense of security that I have never had.
Yes.
Yeah.
Actually, it is really related to a conversation that Mike and I had a couple of weeks ago. You remember, Mike, I texted you and said, I want to start boxing again.
Yeah.
And the reason I want to start boxing again is because I don't want to feel like prey anymore.
Right.
I feel like flat-footed and out of shape and like I am prey. So if you take that concept and you think about steeping in anxiety for your whole life, it develops a mindset of being prey, a victim, right? Versus predator. I'm not trying to be a predator either, right? That would be going the opposite direction and like aggressing in ways that are not consistent with my values.
Right.
The goal is to get to a place where I'm not prey, I'm not predator, I'm somebody that can defend herself and hold my center no matter kind of what comes at me in the scheme of things. And that's where I want to get back to. But I have a long road to go to get back to that mind state of feeling like, hey, I can defend myself. One of the books I'm working on right now is with Michael Sugru. He's a retired police sergeant from the Walnut Creek PD, and he was involved in a number of things. And one of the things that he talked about is after he had to take a life in the line of duty, how some of those memories were lost. And typically at the end of every chapter, I write 2 or 3 pages kind of from the psychologist's point of view, very clinical, kind of objective. For the last chapter that I wrote, and I told you about this, Mike, I deviated from that and wrote about how when I was in college, I was assaulted. And this guy posed as a bouncer and put me in a headlock and tried to drag me into an alley. And so I hadn't talked about that for 20 years plus with even people I love and trust, never talked about it. He didn't, go through with the assault because I got quiet, and at the time was, really into martial arts and kind of found like something I could hurt badly on his body. And it was his
balls.
ear. No, it wasn't his balls. We didn't get that far. He had me in a headlock, and I was searching around for a soft piece of something sticking out, and I connected with an ear and ripped down on that as hard as I could, and until it was like almost off his head. And then he must have just stumbled off into the darkness, but I don't remember how it played out. And so the ability to do that, I don't know that I still have that, that mental presence to say, I'm not going to be prey to you. If there's anything I can do, I'm not going to make this easy for you. That has shifted, I think, a little bit in me, if I'm being honest, over years of sitting at my computer and writing, articles and things like that. And I miss that part of myself. So for me, the work is to integrate back that athletic self over the next phase, so that I don't feel defenseless, because that's not a good feeling.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense, actually. yeah, I do feel like prey to a certain extent, and I do have that generalized anxiety. And I think I'm definitely going to be thinking about this a lot in the coming weeks and trying to, find a path forward to even uncovering that part of myself. Like, it's like so buried. I'm going to have to, dig a little bit to even find her and see what we can do. So
It'll be
Yeah.
fun. It'll be fun. Don't you think, Mike?
Yeah.
Yes, it will. It's a cool journey. The scariest thing is just looking at it for the first time, and then you get in there and you're like, oh, why haven't I done this before?
Yeah.
I will be the person throwing the wet blanket on the fire right now because this is really fun.
Mhm.
And I know, Shauna, we need to have you back on the podcast because I can already hear and feel and see all the emails coming in with questions.
Mhm. Yeah, we didn't even
from our
talk about
listeners.
food. We didn't even get to food.
Didn't even get to food.
So
Yeah.
we need to. But I do want to. Can we put some information in the show notes, Shauna, about the injections?
ganglion block?
Yeah, exactly, and
Sure.
kind of like what you're doing
Yeah.
with that. It would be great. Be amazing.
Everyone
Yeah, I
check
have
the show notes.
something.
It's in there.
All right.
Yeah, I have something I just finished producing. It's a 3-minute intro to SGB video
Ah,
that I
Oh,
can
good.
send you guys.
Yeah,
That'll be
yeah.
Yes,
like
that'll be in there. Listeners, go look at that video right now. It's in our show notes.
that would be awesome. Thank you so much for coming on. This was amazing for me. I had like a
Yeah.
breakthrough. I was like,
That's great.
Who knew?
That's great.
This is
Yeah.
awesome. Oh my God.
Practical psychology, right?
It's great. It's great. I appreciate it so much.
Yeah. Thank you,
You're
Shauna.
welcome. You're so welcome. For you, Mike, whatever you need.
All right. Well, I want to get I would definitely like to eventually get a stellate ganglion block. And then it'd be fun to be able to talk about the difference on the show.
Oh yeah.
And what it's
We
like.
could do that. We could totally do that. We have a guy now who's a great provider named Dr. John Howe down in Encinitas, 30 minutes from Camp Pendleton. Maybe I'll go down there with you.
Let's do it. I am in.
I'm jealous,
100%
man.
in.
I'm like, do I have to go get in the
You
Marines?
can come with
and
us.
Yeah.
No, we treat everyone. Don't have to serve. We treat civilians.
Oh.
Yeah, why don't you guys reach out and
Yeah.
let you know more about how to get connected, and maybe we can all go down.
That would be
freaking
friggin' amazing. Okay.
Yes.
Let's
Do
do
a
it.
follow-up show. All right.
Awesome. Thanks so much, everybody, and have
You're
a
welcome.
great week.
Alrighty, that concludes today's episode of the Age Groupies Podcast with me, Lindsay Hiken, and my co-host, Mike Ergo. We really hope you enjoyed it. You can follow the show on Instagram at Age Groupies, join our Age Groupies page on Facebook, and look us up by name, Lindsay Hiken and Mike Ergo on Strava. If you have questions, comments, or topic ideas, feel free to email us at agegroupies@gmail.com. If you enjoy the show, please leave a rating and review on iTunes or wherever you get your podcast, as this really helps us get more exposure while we try to grow this little venture. And of course, if you have friends you think might like the show, please be sure to share it with them. But for now, thanks for listening, and we will talk to you next week.